Hey guys, I guess you're ready for sleeping time. Feel free to let us know in the comments below what time it is in your country. And without further ado, let's begin. Imagine waking up in 1325, scratching flea bites from a bug-infested straw mattress, surrounded by livestock in your one-room hut. This wasn't a nightmare, it was the daily life for medieval peasants. Tonight, we'll explore why wouldn't survive in medieval times, from torture to famine and lack of food. Dim your lights, get comfortable, and let's drift back to a time when life was anything but romantic. Imagine waking up. Not in your bed, not in your city, and not even in your century. You open your eyes and the sky is grey. Your body aches. The air is cold. You're lying on coarse straw, not a mattress. Your back sticks to it, not from sweat, but because something sticky has soaked through your clothes. Your surroundings are dim. You rise slowly and look around. You're in a small, crooked wooden hut. The walls are made of wattle and daub, essentially sticks, mud, and dried animal dung. The roof? Thatched straw, patched with moss. There's one tiny, grimy window. No glass, just animal skin stretched tightly and stitched with care. And the smell, it hits you all at once. The stench of rot, sweat, dung, smoke, and decay. Not one smell, but many, layered like a thick fog. There's a pile of animal skins in the corner, a rusted iron pot in the fireplace, and at your feet, rats, fat ones, not afraid of you. They scurry lazily. One pauses and sniffs your hand, as if expecting food or a corpse. You step outside. The muddy street is alive. Chickens cluck beneath carts. Pigs wallow in shallow, oily puddles. A blacksmith hammers in the distance. You hear coughing, deep, wet coughing. A child walks barefoot through the mud. His face is covered in grime, and his eyes lock onto yours. Suspicious, curious, then gone. You look down at yourself. You're wearing linen, but it's scratchy, rough, hand-woven. No elastic waistbands, no zippers, no softness. Everything itches. Your shoes, they're leather, but crudely sewn and stiff. Your modern clothes are gone. Your phone, your wallet, your watch, nothing. You instinctively cover your nose. The smell hasn't faded. In fact, it's stronger here. Human waste lines the edge of the path. Open trenches where people relieve themselves. Every few feet there's the smell of something burning. Wood, mostly, but also hair and something else. Something worse. There's no running water, no drains, no bins. Waste, human and animal, is dumped directly into the street. The rain spreads it. The mud you're standing in? It isn't just soil. You walk, carefully, past bent wooden houses, past villagers who stop what they're doing and stare. You don't look like them. You don't move like them. And most of all, you're clean. Even if you didn't shower this morning, by medieval standards, you're pristine. Your teeth are white. Your skin is soft. You're not missing fingers or teeth. You walk upright. You smell foreign. You try to speak. Hello, you say, but no one responds because they don't understand you. Even though you're in England or France or Italy, the language has shifted across the centuries. Words sound strange, accents are thick. You're babbling like a lunatic in their ears. A man approaches. He has a deep scar across his cheek. His nose is broken. His clothes are layered wool, patched, greasy, stiff. He eyes you up and down, says something harsh and quick, and spits at your feet. You don't know what he said, but you understand the meaning. You don't belong here. Now you look around and try to orient yourself. You see no clocks, no signs, no shops. The concept of stores hasn't developed yet. There's a market, but it's more like a jumble of wooden carts. Live chickens in cages, dead fish on hooks, blood pooling on wooden boards. There are no food labels, no packaging, just smell and trust. You want to wash your hands. You see a barrel of water near one home and dip your fingers in. The water is cloudy. It smells faintly like eggs. A woman yells at you and shoves you away. That water wasn't for washing, it was for drinking. You feel dizzy. Maybe it's the stench, maybe it's the fear, maybe it's something worse. Because already your immune system is under siege. You've just walked into a microbial minefield. Your body isn't ready for the bacteria and parasites living in the air, the mud, the food, and even the clothes. Modern sanitation has made you soft. Your gut flora, untrained for this world. You sit down on a stone step, trying to catch your breath. You look up. A church bell rings in the distance. Not a digital tone, but a heavy, metallic boom that seems to vibrate through the air. People start to gather and kneel. In your century, hunger is a passing inconvenience. A quick snack, a fridge away. But here, hunger is a lifestyle. Food isn't guaranteed. It's not something you choose from a menu. It's something you hope will be there tomorrow. And even if it is, you probably won't recognize it. Let's start with the bread, the very foundation of the medieval diet. In a small village, it's made from coarse grains, barley, rye, maybe some oats if you're lucky. But wheat, that's rare, reserved for the rich. Bread here isn't white, soft, or fluffy. It's dark, dense, and gritty. Why gritty? Because the flour is ground with stone, and tiny bits of rock end up in every loaf. Over time, this wears down your teeth. Not metaphorically, literally. By age 30, most peasants' molars are flat or broken. Many have abscesses. Some just pull the teeth out and live with the pain. You take a bite. The crust is like bark. The inside tastes sour. And that sourness, that's not sourdough. That's age, rot, and maybe a little mold. Next, meat. You see a small pig roasting on a spit and think, finally, something hearty. But meat isn't normal for peasants. It's a rare treat. Most villagers eat meat only a few times per year, if at all. The pig you see, it probably belongs to the local lord or is being prepared for a festival or a funeral. Even when peasants do eat meat, it's often old, salted, or smoked, preserved for weeks or even months. Fresh meat spoils quickly, and without refrigeration, it's risky. Maggots aren't always picked off, and spices, forget it. Pepper is more expensive than gold. Salt is precious. Most food is bland or bitter or both. A stew might have roots, beans, cabbage, and if you're lucky, a bone. Now, imagine you're a vegetarian, by choice or by modern lifestyle. In medieval Europe, that choice does not exist. There's no kale, no tofu, no quinoa, no protein shakes. Lentils, if you find them, are a luxury. Nuts are rare, peas are common, but not always fresh, and fruits, seasonal. You won't see a banana, or an orange, or even a tomato, not until the Columbian Exchange, centuries away. Dairy, it exists, but it's raw, unpasteurized. The milk might still be warm from the animal. It might have hair in it. Cheese is common, but it's hard, sour, and sometimes riddled with bacteria. Butter, if made, is yellowed, salty, and gritty. You try to drink water. It looks clear, but it isn't. Wells are shallow, rivers are toilets, ponds are breeding grounds. The concept of boiling to sanitize exists, but it's not always practiced. Instead, people often drink ale, weak beer, even children. Because fermented liquids are safer than untreated water. And if you're allergic to gluten, lactose intolerant, sensitive to food bacteria, you're in real danger. There's no EpiPen, no Imodium, no safe alternatives. You'll likely experience something very familiar to travelers today, but far more dangerous: travelers' diarrhea. Your gut bacteria is completely unprepared for this new world. The microbes in their food and water are foreign to your immune system. You'll begin with cramps, then nausea, then the kind of relentless sickness that dehydrates you in hours. And there are no IV drips here. You sit near a communal fire, watching villagers dip their hands into a pot of bubbling stew. They eat with their fingers or crude wooden spoons. There's no hygiene, no hand washing, no soap. One man sneezes directly into the pot. You lose your appetite. Even if you do eat, you won't get the calories you're used to. Medieval people lived on around 2,000 to 2,500 calories, mostly from carbs, but they burned almost everything they consumed. From sunrise to sunset, they labored, dug, sowed, reaped, chopped, walked, hauled. Food wasn't indulgent, it was fuel, and it was never enough. Starvation wasn't rare, it was seasonal. During poor harvests, whole villages suffered. People stretched whatever food they had. They ate bark, roots, leather, even dirt. In some records from famines, there are dark rumors of cannibalism. Not tales of monsters, tales of mothers and children. And there's no grocery day, no fasting for weight loss, no cheat meals. This is survival. By nightfall, your stomach growls. You've eaten almost nothing all day. The bread scratched your throat. The stew turned your stomach. You sip some ale, hoping it will settle things. Instead, your gut begins a slow rebellion as you curl up to sleep. Cold, itchy, and exposed, the cramps begin. You don't know if it's food poisoning, parasites, or something worse. And the worst part? This is just a normal day. Tomorrow, maybe leaner. Medicine and misery. You awake in the middle of the night. Your stomach churns. Your body shivers. You've thrown up twice already, and now there's blood in your stool. You're feverish, soaked in sweat, and in pain. This isn't just food poisoning, it's an infection. And here, in the 14th century, that's a death sentence waiting to be written. You need a doctor, but the word doctor means something very different now. Modern medicine doesn't exist. The very idea of germs won't be understood for another 500 years. The microscope hasn't been invented. There are no antibiotics, no sterile tools, no x-rays, no IV fluids, and certainly no emergency rooms. Instead, you find a man in a long robe. He smells of herbs, wine, and rot. His hands are dirty. His breath carries the scent of spoiled cheese. He's the local physician, if you can afford him. Or more likely, the barber surgeon. The same man who cuts hair also cuts flesh. He listens to your complaints, then mutters in Latin and prepares to balance your humours. Because according to medieval medicine, illness isn't caused by bacteria, but by an imbalance of the body's 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. So he pulls out a knife, not a small, sharp scalpel, but a dull, rusting blade. You're about to be bled. He opens a vein in your arm to release bad blood. You grow dizzy, weak, cold. You lose a pint, maybe more, while the infection still brews inside you. If you object, if you panic, you're told this is the accepted treatment. It's what everyone does. And if you die, well, then your humours were beyond repair. Let's say you survive the night, but now the wound from the bleeding becomes red and inflamed. It starts to swell. Pus forms. Your body trembles. You're likely developing sepsis, a deadly systemic infection, but no one knows that word. They might try leeches next, or apply a poultice of mashed herbs, honey, or even dung, which was common for drawing out bad spirits. Sometimes they press burning metal to your skin to cauterize the wound. You scream, they pray. If your condition worsens, fever spikes, skin turns pale, lips crack, the village priest may be called instead of the healer. Because now, your illness is no longer medical, it's spiritual. You're asked, have you sinned? Have you offended God? Have you consorted with demons? Illness, they believe, can be divine punishment. Your suffering might not be biological. It might be judgment. If you confess, they pray over you. If you resist, some might accuse you of witchcraft. But let's step back. What if it wasn't an infection? What if your suffering came from something simpler, like a broken bone? You slip on the slick wooden stairs and hear a snap in your ankle. The pain is sharp, hot, nauseating. You scream out. A neighbor hears you and brings help. The village bone setter arrives. No anesthetic, no antiseptic. Just a splint made from sticks and strips of wool. They yank the bone into place by hand, bind it tightly, and tell you to rest. If the bone heals crooked, that's how you walk forever. If it gets infected, your leg may have to be amputated. With what tools? A hacksaw. Held down by villagers, you'd be given a block of wood to bite. And then they cut, fast and brutal. There's no morphine, no sedation. And if you scream too much, they might gag you. You pray not to pass out. You pray to pass out. Now consider childbirth. You may not be giving birth, but in medieval times, every woman faced death every time she did. There were no prenatal vitamins, no ultrasounds, no epidurals. Birth happened at home with midwives, experienced but untrained by modern standards. If the baby was stuck or breech, forceps might be used, crude iron tools that often injured both child and mother. If the mother began hemorrhaging, she would die within minutes. No transfusions, no surgeries. Roughly 1 in 3 women died from childbirth-related causes across their lifetime. And then there's mental health. You've been through trauma. You're anxious, panicked, grieving, maybe even hallucinating from fever or fatigue. But depression? It isn't understood. It's seen as laziness or melancholy, a term used more poetically than medically. Anxiety, possession, schizophrenia, witchcraft, epilepsy, demonic. There are no therapists, no support groups, no medication. If you show signs of emotional instability, you might be shunned or chained up. If you're lucky, they'll pray for you. If not, they'll fear you. Let's imagine for a moment that you contract the bubonic plague, which is entirely possible. One infected flea from a rat could deliver it. Symptoms start with fever, then chills, nausea, swollen lymph nodes, black, painful buboes in your neck, groin, or armpits. Your skin darkens, blisters, you vomit blood. Within days, sometimes hours, you die. There is no cure. All they can do is quarantine you, if they're even organized enough to do that. More likely, you're left to die alone in a shed, or thrown on a cart full of corpses. The village moves on. Your body, like thousands of others, becomes part of the death toll that wiped out 1/3 of Europe in the 14th century. And even if you avoid all of this, the infections, the injuries, the epidemics, you're still aging in a world with no dental care, no eyeglasses for most, no balanced nutrition. Your body will wear down fast. By your 30s, you'll feel 60. By your 40s, if you make it that far, you're considered old. You may not survive the week. And yet, no one here pities you, because suffering is a part of life. It always has been. Soft music returns, like the wind blowing through a monastery courtyard. Medicine in medieval times was less about healing and more about surviving, or dying with dignity. It wasn't your right, it was a gamble, a prayer, and in this world, you don't have the odds. Chapter 4, Law, Order, and Torture. Ambient, a distant hammer striking iron, quiet murmuring voices, church bells tolling slowly. A faint chain rattles beneath it all. You've survived illness, you've survived hunger, but now something unexpected threatens your life. Something even more unpredictable, justice, or at least what they called justice. In medieval Europe, the law is not what you know today. There are no public defenders, no rights to remain silent, no standard legal procedures. Justice is swift, cruel, and often based more on superstition than fact. It starts with a misunderstanding. Maybe you said something strange, a phrase that made no sense to the villagers. Or you refused to kneel during Mass. Maybe someone saw you writing in a notebook and thought it looked like sorcery. Or maybe you simply looked at the wrong person the wrong way. Whatever it was, you're now a suspect. You're dragged before the local authority, not a police officer, but the manorial court, run by the local lord or his steward. This isn't a courtroom, it's a barn or the town square. Witnesses might be neighbours. There is no presumption of innocence. If you're accused, you're already halfway to being guilty, and the punishment, it depends. But most often, it begins with pain. Let's say someone accuses you of theft. You insist you're innocent. They might not investigate. Instead, they call for a trial by ordeal. You're handed a red-hot iron bar and told to carry it for several feet. Then, they bandage your hands and wait 3 days. If the wounds fester, you're guilty. If they heal cleanly, you're innocent. Another form of ordeal, trial by water. Your arms are tied, you're thrown into a river. If you sink, you're innocent, but you might drown. If you float, you're guilty, because the water has rejected you. It's lose, lose. But maybe it's not theft. Maybe they say you cursed someone, or looked at a dying cow and muttered something they couldn't understand. Now you're accused of sorcery, and here, things turn from bad to brutal. You're chained in a cellar or shackled to a wall. The local inquisitor is summoned, often a church official trained in extracting confessions. You aren't asked nicely, you're coerced. Torture is legal, and it's common. They begin with the strappado, your hands tied behind your back, then suspended by a rope until your shoulders dislocate. If you scream, they say it's the demons leaving your body, or the rack, where your limbs are slowly pulled apart. Each crank of the wheel tears muscle and tendon, or the thumbscrew, where iron is slowly twisted against the joints of your fingers until they break or shatter. You may be innocent, it doesn't matter. What matters is confession, because confession confirms their beliefs, it validates the system, and it ensures the punishment can proceed. You may confess just to make the pain stop. You may scream anything they want to hear, but once you confess, there is no undoing it. Execution follows, perhaps not immediately, but soon. And how you die depends on what you were accused of. For theft, hanging, in public, from a tree or gallows. For blasphemy or heresy, burning, a slow death, meant to purify your soul through flame. For treason, something worse, hanging, drawing, and quartering in England. A sentence too cruel to describe in gentle terms. For witchcraft, drowning or burning, and those who remain silent during torture are often condemned anyway, for their unnatural resistance. Sometimes they don't kill you. Instead, they shame you. They put you in the stocks, your head and hands locked in wooden beams, exposed to the public. People spit, throw filth, even urinate on you. You may be left there for days, in rain, heat, or cold. Or they brand you, burn your skin with iron to mark you as a criminal, on your face, your hand, your chest. A permanent warning to others. You might wonder, can you run? You could try, but roads are patrolled, towns are suspicious, strangers are rare, and without papers, without protection from a lord or charter, you are an outlaw. Literally, outside the protection of the law. Anyone can kill you without consequence. Even your silence can be a threat if you can't explain where you're from, if you don't speak the local dialect, if your accent sounds foreign or your clothing strange. You could be branded a spy or devilkin. Now pause and consider this. Your crime may not have even been real. It may have been poverty. It may have been ignorance. It may have been just being different. Because in the medieval world, law is not about fairness. It's about order and fear and control. There are no appeals, no lawyers, no understanding of mental illness, no forensic evidence, no due process. You, with all your modern instincts, to reason, to explain, to ask for your rights, will be seen as arrogant, dangerous, perhaps unholy. Distant thunder rolls. The toll of a bell signals an execution. You thought justice would protect you, but here, it just might destroy you. The social hierarchy. Ambient village sounds, horses trotting past, murmuring voices, the clang of a church bell tolling noon. Soft wind moves through tall wheat fields. You've avoided the plague, escaped the stocks, survived the bread, the infection, and the brutal justice. But now you must live. And in medieval Europe, that's the hardest part of all. Because no matter how clever you are, how resourceful, how determined, you were born into the wrong class. And here, your class is not a label, it is your fate. You are a peasant. More specifically, a villain or serf, depending on the region. That means you don't own land, you don't own your home, you don't even own your time. You are tied to the land of your lord, the local noble who controls everything. His estate includes your village, your field, your food, your fate. You work his land in exchange for scraps of freedom. And if you leave without permission, you're a fugitive. Forget the modern idea of choosing a career. Here you are what you were born to be, and what your parents were before you. A farmer, a ploughman, a thatcher, a swineherd, a servant. And if you're lucky, you'll stay one of those. Let's walk through the medieval social pyramid. From the top to you. At the very summit is the king, ordained by God, unquestioned in authority. He owns all land, grants portions of it to powerful nobles, lords, earls, dukes, in exchange for loyalty and knights. Below them, the knights themselves. Warriors granted land, called fiefs, in return for military service. They rule over manors where the vast majority of the population, people like you, live and work. Next are the freemen, rare self-sufficient individuals who rent land and owe fewer obligations. They might own a few tools or livestock. They may even be literate. But most people, including you, fall below even that. You're a serf. Legally, you're not a slave. But practically, the difference is small. You can't move, marry, or work elsewhere without permission. You owe rent, labor, and loyalty. You spend 6 days a week working your lord's fields. On the 7th, you rest, but only because the church demands it. Your taxes aren't just coins. They're goods, services, and days of labor. The oxen you borrow? Taxed. The grain you grow? Taxed. The bread you bake? Taxed. And when the harvest fails, as it often does, you still owe everything. Getting, if you're a woman, the chain is even tighter. Your marriage is arranged. Your dowry determines your worth. Your role is to bear children, hopefully boys, and work the home and fields. You do not speak at meetings. You do not read. You do not inherit. You do not choose. And if your husband dies, your fate is uncertain. Widows without sons may be forced to remarry, or lose what little they have. You walk through the manor village and see it clearly now. At the manor house, the lord, well fed, with clean robes and access to rare goods, salt, wine, silk. At the abbey, monks, well educated, literate, powerful through the church. At the village centre, craftsmen, blacksmiths, millers. More respected, but still bound by guilds and regulations. And outside that, you, the thatcher's helper, the dung collector, the ditch digger. Even the way people speak to you is different. No sir, no friend, just commands. You wonder, can I rise? Can I learn to read? Can I open a shop? The answer is no. There is no school for you. No upward mobility. The church might teach some boys to read, but only those chosen, and only under strict obedience. Towns have guilds, but you can't join unless you're an apprentice, and those spots are passed from father to son, not given to strangers. You can't just work harder to succeed. That idea, merit, hustle, ambition, doesn't exist here. You were born low, and low you will remain. Now imagine saying this to a medieval lord. I'm from the future. I know things. I have ideas. They laugh or they burn you, because your status isn't based on knowledge. It's based on birth, on divine order. The king rules by God's will. The lords rule under the king, and you serve both. That is the natural law. To question it is not just treason, it's heresy. Wind blows through an empty wheat field. The sun sets behind the manor tower, casting a long shadow across the village. You've survived this long, but now you must face a harder truth. You have no freedom, not of movement, not of choice, not of thought. And in this world, freedom is not your right. It is a privilege you'll never be given. War and violence, a world you wouldn't survive. Imagine waking up in a world where peace is an illusion, where violence isn't just a distant headline, but a daily threat. In medieval times, war wasn't a special event, it was a recurring fact of life. For a modern person used to stability, hospitals, human rights, and safe neighborhoods, stepping into this world would be like stepping into a nightmare with no pause button. From the moment you arrive in the Middle Ages, you're already in danger, and not just from swords and arrows. You're in danger because you don't know the rules, you don't know who to trust, who to fear, or which road not to walk. The land is divided into fiefs, ruled by powerful lords, each with their own army and ambitions. If you're caught in the wrong territory, or worse, mistaken for a spy, you could be tortured before you can say a single word in your defense. War in this era wasn't sleek or cinematic. It was dirty, brutal, and exhausting. Armies marched for days through thick forests and muddy fields, wearing armor that could crush your shoulders. You wouldn't last long carrying 60 pounds of steel in sweltering heat or freezing rain. No modern gym prepares you for that kind of endurance. If you thought your office was stressful, try sleeping outside with thousands of anxious, lice-infested men, drinking from contaminated water sources and eating spoiled bread. Hygiene was almost non-existent. Soldiers rarely bathed, open wounds festered. Infection was the real killer, and medical care. It involved herbs, prayers, and if you were lucky, the amputation of a limb without screaming too much. Sieges were a slow, suffocating horror. Castles could be surrounded for months. No food came in, disease thrived. People ate rats. Water was scarce. Death crept through the walls, not with swords, but with starvation and rot. Modern minds, so used to convenience and comfort, would shatter in the face of this hopeless monotony. And then there's the violence itself, intimate and terrifying. Combat wasn't distant like modern warfare. It was face to face, breath to breath. You didn't pull a trigger. You looked into your opponent's eyes as you drove cold iron through bone and flesh. You heard them scream. You felt the warmth of their blood. For someone used to screens and simulations, this would be soul-crushing. But the real terror? It was that the violence never ended. Raids were frequent. Villages were burned. Women were taken. Children disappeared. No one was safe, not in cities, not in the countryside. At any moment, your home could be reduced to ash, your family scattered, and there would be no police to call, no emergency line to dial. You survive by obedience or by hiding. Most modern people are not prepared for that kind of constant fear. Today's worries, deadlines, traffic, emails are nothing compared to hearing the horns of an invading army at dawn, the crackling flames of your neighbor's home, the gallop of foreign horses just beyond the trees. And still, life went on. People planted crops, prayed, held their children close, and whispered stories by the fire. But that strength came from a lifetime of endurance, something built into their bones. You, with your soft hands and fragile peace of mind, wouldn't last a day. Disease and medicine, a world without mercy. Now, close your eyes and imagine this. You're feeling a bit off, a fever maybe. Your throat is sore, your joints ache. In the modern world, you'd sip some water, call your doctor, maybe take a few days off work. But here, in medieval times, that little fever might just be your death sentence. The world you've entered has no antibiotics, no sterile needles, no Tylenol. There are no hospitals with clean white beds or soft-spoken nurses. Medicine, as we know it, simply does not exist. What you'll find instead is a barber surgeon with blood-stained tools standing under a flickering torch, ready to saw off a limb with no anesthetic. You'll find a local herbalist who treats your symptoms with ground-up toads, dried roots and whispered prayers. You might even find a priest diagnosing your illness as divine punishment for sins you didn't know you committed. There are no vaccines here, no understanding of germs or viruses. The idea of sanitizing anything hasn't yet been born. Doctors still believe that the body is governed by 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile. Too much of one, they think, causes disease. So they'll cut you open to let the illness drain out. You'd be surrounded by disease from the moment you arrived. Dysentery in the water, typhoid in the food, tuberculosis in the air. You'd walk through towns where open sewage runs down the street. Rats skitter between rotting meat and mouldy bread. People cough constantly, their faces pale and sunken, their breath damp with illness. No masks, no hygiene, just sickness. Everywhere. And then, of course, there's the plague, the Black Death. A disease so powerful it wiped out half of Europe's population in just a few years. You could catch it from a flea bite, or from a shared blanket, or just by breathing too close to the wrong person. Your lymph nodes would swell into blackened lumps. Fever would burn your mind. And within days, you'd be gone. No hospitals, no hope. To a modern person, this world is not just dangerous. It's utterly alien. You're used to healing being a promise. Here, it's a wish, a prayer, maybe a myth. People died young, very young. Childhood diseases that today are easily treated were often fatal. If you survived into adulthood, it was considered an achievement. Even childbirth was perilous. Mothers often died giving birth. Babies too. There were no C-sections, no epidurals, just courage and silence. Pain was expected. Death was familiar, and mourning was routine. In a world like this, your immune system, raised in a sterile environment, pampered by vaccines and clean living, would stand little chance. You wouldn't last a day, not just because of the illness, but because of the way fear and sickness cling to everything here. The air, the food, the skin. And yet, medieval people lived with it. They adapted. They endured. They placed their faith in the divine, their hope in nature, and their trust in time. They knew suffering from birth, and still they sang lullabies to their children. But you, a creature of comfort, born into antiseptic safety, your body, your mind, even your spirit, wouldn't survive long. Take a deep breath. Imagine waking up not in your soft bed with fresh sheets, but on a straw-stuffed mattress crawling with fleas, in a room with no windows and no plumbing, where the air is thick with the scent of sweat, soot, and chamber pots. This is medieval hygiene. The modern world is clean in ways most people take for granted. Hot showers, soap, toothbrushes, deodorant. But in the medieval world, these things did not exist in any reliable form. A modern person would be overwhelmed almost immediately. Let's start with bathing. For most people, washing was rare, maybe once a month, maybe less. In some towns, public bathhouses existed, but they were few, and after the Black Death, they were often avoided for fear of spreading disease. Most peasants bathed in rivers or used cloths and bowls. There was no scented soap, no shampoo, no toothpaste. Teeth were scrubbed with twigs or sometimes left entirely alone. Your skin would itch constantly from fleas and lice. Almost everyone had them, rich or poor. Hair was rarely washed. Shaving was a luxury. Body odor was simply part of life. People covered it with perfumes or herbs if they could afford it, but most simply ignored it. And then there were the toilets. Imagine having no bathroom, no privacy, just a wooden bench with a hole in it, perched over a pit, or worse, a simple bucket in the corner of your home. In cities, chamber pots were emptied directly into the streets. If you were unlucky enough to walk by at the wrong time, someone might shout, "Gardez l'eau," French for "watch out for the water," just before dumping the contents from an upper window. The streets ran with human waste. Rain only made it worse, turning everything into foul-smelling sludge. Rats thrived in this world, spreading disease with ease. Your shoes would be constantly soiled, your clothes never truly clean, and laundry, that was done by hand, in cold river water with lye and sand, abrasive, harsh, and ineffective. If you're someone who uses hand sanitizer regularly, who enjoys fresh linens and citrus-scented body wash, you would not make it here. Your senses would rebel, your stomach would churn, you'd long for a single, clean towel, a clean floor, a clean breath. But the medieval world didn't pause for your discomfort. This was simply how life was. A world where filth was a constant, quiet companion, where smells weren't noticed anymore, where people aged fast, their skin worn by dirt and disease, their hands roughened by the labor of cleaning a world that never stayed clean for long. And still, people lived, they laughed, they celebrated festivals, they decorated themselves with flowers, they burned herbs in their homes to mask the scent of daily life. But for someone from the modern world, raised in hospitals, gyms, and clean kitchens, the medieval standard of hygiene would be overwhelming, crippling. You wouldn't last a day, not without getting sick, not without losing your appetite, not without craving the simple pleasure of hot, running water. Justice and torture, a world without rights. Now imagine, you're walking down a cobbled road in a medieval town. The morning mist is thick, and the church bells toll somewhere in the distance. But instead of safety, there's an unease in the air. People whisper, children hide. A cart rolls by carrying something strange. A man bound in rope, bloodied and broken, slumps against the wooden boards. He's being taken to the square for punishment. This is medieval justice, and for a modern person, it would be nothing short of horrifying. In today's world, if you're accused of a crime, you have rights, a lawyer, a trial, evidence, fair treatment, at least in theory. But in the Middle Ages, the idea of human rights simply did not exist. Guilt or innocence often didn't matter. Your fate could rest in the hands of a local lord, a corrupt constable, or even a frightened mob. Trials were rare for common folk, and when they did happen, they were far from fair. You could be accused by rumor or through superstition. And how did you prove your innocence? Sometimes you didn't. You might be subjected to trial by ordeal, a cruel method of letting God decide. You could be forced to plunge your hand into boiling water. If it blistered too much, you were guilty, or you might be tied and thrown into a river. If you floated, it meant you were a witch. If you sank, you were innocent, but drowned. Torture wasn't hidden behind locked doors. It was public, legal, and often encouraged. Devices like the rack, the Iron Maiden, or thumbscrews were used not just for punishment, but to extract confessions. Not the truth, just a confession, because pain made people say anything. Even the most peaceful towns had a gallows or a pillory or a whipping post. Executions were events. People gathered with food and laughter. Children watched. Heads rolled. Bodies were burned. It wasn't seen as grotesque. It was normal, expected. Imagine being accused of stealing bread and having your hands cut off, or being suspected of heresy and being burned alive, and all of it happening in front of your neighbors. No appeals, no cameras, no headlines, just screams and silence. And worst of all, you, as a modern person, wouldn't even understand the laws. You'd say the wrong thing, wear the wrong color, eat the wrong meat on the wrong day, offend the wrong official, break a law that no longer exists. You'd have no defense, no one to call, no system to protect you. You wouldn't survive long. Medieval justice was meant to control, to terrify, to make examples of people. And yet, people still lived under it. They navigated it carefully, knew when to speak, when to be silent, when to disappear. But you, coming from a world of rights and order, of police reports and due process, you'd walk straight into danger, unaware, unprotected, and that ignorance would be your undoing. Food and famine. Hunger was a season. Close your eyes now and picture your kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator, the click of the stove, fresh fruit in a bowl, a hot drink waiting in the kettle. At any hour, day or night, you can eat what you crave. But in the medieval world, hunger was not a passing feeling. It was a season, a rhythm, a threat that returned year after year, unpredictable and cruel. If you were lucky enough to eat at all, your food would have been coarse, plain and repetitive. Bread, onions and a weak ale, that was a feast for many. Meat was rare, especially for peasants. Salted pork, if preserved well enough, could last through winter. But most meals were grey, mushy stews of root vegetables and grains. Fresh fruit, exotic. Sugar, unimaginable. Spices, reserved for the wealthy elite. Traded across continents for fortunes. Even something as simple as clean water could be hard to find. Rivers were polluted, wells could run dry, and the wrong drink could leave you bedridden or dead. There were no supermarkets, no delivery apps, no plastic wrap, no refrigeration. Everything had to be grown, caught, preserved or traded. If the harvest failed, if the rains came too late or too soon, there was nothing. Entire villages starved. Famine came not as a surprise, but as an old visitor, familiar, feared. When it hit hard. People ate bark, leather, insects. In desperate times, stories emerged of darker acts, of families driven to unthinkable choices. And always, the rich ate first. If you were poor, your survival depended on favors, mercy, or theft. And theft, well, you already know what the punishment was. For someone from the modern world, with shelves of snacks and constant abundance, even one day in this food system would be unbearable. You wouldn't know what to eat. You wouldn't know how to cook it over a smoky hearth. You wouldn't know how to preserve it. There would be no labels, no expiration dates, no sterile packaging, just trial and sometimes fatal error. Even the act of eating was different. Forks were rare. Most ate with their hands. Hygiene, minimal. Dishes weren't washed. They were scraped. And in a world without napkins, sleeves served many purposes. You'd grow weak quickly, tired, irritable. Your body, used to vitamins and routine, would falter on salted beans and mouldy rye. Malnutrition wasn't rare, it was expected. Most people lacked what we'd call basic nutrition. Children were often underweight. Adults lost teeth early. Scurvy, rickets, and pellagra haunted entire regions. And yet, life went on. People survived. They shared when they could. They celebrated harvest festivals and gave thanks, even for thin porridge. But for someone like you, used to choice, flavor, convenience, food would no longer be a pleasure. It would become a daily struggle, a silent panic. And famine, you wouldn't be ready for it. You wouldn't see it coming. And once it came, there would be no escape. You wouldn't last a day. Let's continue then, drifting further back in time, deeper into a world where even the air itself felt different, where the cold bit harder, the heat off. Your food would have been coarse, plain and repetitive. Bread, onions and a weak ale, that was a feast for many. Meat was rare, especially for peasants. Salted pork, if preserved well enough, could last through winter. But most meals were grey, mushy stews of root vegetables and grains. Fresh fruit, exotic. Sugar, unimaginable. Spices, reserved for the wealthy elite. Traded across continents for fortunes. Even something as simple as clean water could be hard to find. Rivers were polluted, wells could run dry, and the wrong drink could leave you bedridden or dead. There were no supermarkets, no delivery apps, no plastic wrap, no refrigeration. Everything had to be grown, caught, preserved, or traded. If the harvest failed, if the rains came too late or too soon, there was nothing. Entire villages starved. Famine came not as a surprise, but as an old visitor, familiar, feared. When it hit hard. People ate bark, leather, insects. In desperate times, stories emerged of darker acts, of families driven to unthinkable choices. And always, the rich ate first. If you were poor, your survival depended on favors, mercy, or theft. And theft, well, you already know what the punishment was. For someone from the modern world, with shelves of snacks and constant abundance, even one day in this food system would be unbearable. You wouldn't know what to eat. You wouldn't know how to cook it over a smoky hearth. You wouldn't know how to preserve it. There would be no labels, no expiration dates, no sterile packaging, just trial and sometimes fatal error. Even the act of eating was different. Forks were rare. Most ate with their hands. Hygiene, minimal. Dishes weren't washed. They were scraped. And in a world without napkins, sleeves served many purposes. You'd grow weak quickly, tired, irritable. Your body, used to vitamins and routine, would falter on salted beans and mouldy rye. Malnutrition wasn't rare, it was expected. Most people lacked what we'd call basic nutrition. Children were often underweight. Adults lost teeth early. Scurvy, rickets, and pellagra haunted entire regions. And yet, life went on. People survived. They shared when they could. They celebrated harvest festivals and gave thanks, even for thin porridge. But for someone like you, used to choice, flavor, convenience, food would no longer be a pleasure. It would become a daily struggle, a silent panic. And famine, you wouldn't be ready for it. You wouldn't see it coming. And once it came, there would be no escape. You wouldn't last a day. Let's continue then, drifting further back in time, deeper into a world where even the air itself felt different, where the cold bit harder, the heat offered no refuge, and the clothes on your back could mean the difference between life and death. Chapter: Climate and Clothing, a world that was always cold or too hot. Now, imagine stepping outside, barefoot, no phone, no jacket. The wind cuts like knives across your skin. There's a damp chill that seeps through your clothes, down to your bones. The sky is grey, heavy, pressing low. You look around for shelter, but the world feels raw and open. This is the medieval climate. A modern person would be stunned by how harsh nature feels here. There is no central heating, no air conditioning, no thermal insulation, no waterproof fabrics. The elements were not just an inconvenience, they were an enemy. In winter, fires were the only defense, but firewood was precious. Peasants often spent hours each day gathering sticks and logs, trying to keep one room, just one, warm enough not to freeze. The rest of the house? Icy. Your breath visible. Water frozen in buckets. Fingers stiff. There were no down jackets, no fleece-lined gloves. Clothing was made of wool or coarse linen, heavy, scratchy, often damp. If it got wet, it stayed wet. If it tore, it was patched again and again. And shoes, if you had them, were made of thin leather, easily worn through, with little grip or protection. You would be cold more often than not, painfully cold. But then came summer. The sun was not kind. No fans, no cool drinks, no light, breathable fabric. The same woolen tunic you wore in winter was now soaked in sweat, clinging to your skin. Insects swarmed. Clean water was scarce. Food spoiled quickly. And the heat, trapped inside stone walls, could turn your home into a slow cooking oven. For a modern person, accustomed to adjusting a thermostat or changing into moisture-wicking clothes, this was torment. You wouldn't know how to dress. You wouldn't know how to protect yourself. You wouldn't know how to layer wool to trap warmth without suffocating. You wouldn't know how to dry your clothes over a fire without burning them. And if you got wet, there were no dryers waiting, just time, and the hope that your clothes wouldn't mold before morning. Even sleep was different. Nights were cold and long in the winter, humid and restless in the summer. There were no electric blankets or quiet ceiling fans, just rough bedding, straw mattresses, fleas, and the constant shift of the seasons. And for many medieval people, the cold wasn't just discomfort, it was deadly. Hypothermia was common, so were frostbite and respiratory illnesses. If your clothes wore thin, or your shoes cracked, or the firewood ran out, there was no backup plan. You simply suffered. Even noblemen, those who lived in castles, weren't immune. Drafty halls, stone walls, and wide windows made heat hard to keep. A roaring fireplace at one end of the room barely warmed the other. Rooms were dark, damp, and smoke-filled. The rich might have furs, but the poor had patience. And yet, they adapted. Layer by layer, season by season, they listened to the wind, watched the skies, worked with the land. But you, living in a world where the weather is something you manage, not endure, you wouldn't last long. The chill would creep under your skin. The heat would drain your strength. The clothing would scratch and fail. And nature, indifferent and ancient, would show you no mercy. You wouldn't last a day.